Kind of like these guys, right? I don't know if you can see that in the back. That was one of my favorites. But ongoing support, as I mentioned, is really critical. After the funeral is over, the mourners have gone away, this is the hardest and the loneliest time for most people. And that's when support is needed the most. And don't make assumptions based on appearances. Somebody may be healing pretty well inside, but just hasn't done the laundry in a little while. The opposite side is you may be cleaned up with a fresh shave, haircut, dressed to the T, and inside you're a mess. Don't go by appearances. Make sure you go by, really, what's somebody feeling like? Don't assume. Wait for them to tell you. And as I mentioned, the pain may never totally go away. We have to be sensitive to the fact that none of us are ever quite the same after the death of a really close loved one. You don't get over the death. You learn to accept the loss. The intensity of the pain lessens over time, but that sadness will still come at times. It'll come, especially, as I mentioned, on birthdays, on anniversaries, and Christmas. Those times when we're used to being together. Now here's a warning sign. If you went into someone's home and saw this on their Etch-a-Sketch, hopefully you would seek medical attention right away, right? That's probably a bad sign. For those of you that aren't computer literate, I figured you'd remember an Etch-a-Sketch. So, a child. Before we tie things up, I do want to get to children and grieving as a special subject. Children, what do they need when they've had a major loss? Support, stability, honesty, and reassurance that they will be cared for and kept safe. That seems intuitive, but that's not always how we go about it when we're so worried about the entire extended family. And we don't realize the 8-year-old is off in the backyard by himself with no one. You have to be honest to help them make sense of the loss. Answer questions as truthfully and simply as you can. You don't want to candy coat things. You want to be kind, but true. So concrete and understandable terms have to be used when explaining death to a child. And as I mentioned earlier, children, especially young children, will almost inherently blame themselves, especially for the loss of a parent or a sibling. So we got to do whatever we can. We got to pull that out of them and let them know that as seemingly ridiculous as it may seem to us, they're really likely feeling this way and that it truly, really wasn't their fault, and here's why. And you really need to encourage that open communication and expression. And stories, games, artwork is often how children best communicate their grieving. So that's not only to be encouraged, but it also gives you that are teachers or parents a platform to kind of gauge how they're coping. What is the artwork like? How is it changing over time? What kind of stories and games are they involved in, and how is that changing over time? It's a good litmus test on how they're adapting and healing. Now, this is a little bit different than you may expect, but if the child wants to go, allow them to go to the funeral. They need to see the reality of it if they want to. You don't force them. But if a child really wants to go, bring them. They need to see that death is real and it helps with healing and closure. And be clear about communicating your own spiritual values and your faith about life and death. And that, yes, Grandma didn't go on a vacation, Grandma died, but we believe we will see her again. And here's why. And we'll miss her until we see her again, but we will. And you can make that age appropriate, of course. But meeting regularly, too, with your family, as the case may be, or the child's family, to discuss the coping mechanisms and any potential need for interventions can be really helpful. And really encouraging the child to memorialize their lost loved one helps too. Maybe it's a photo album, maybe it's artwork. Anything creative can help in that healing process. And certainly pray with the child if you can. I know in public school that might be an issue, but in other forums, hopefully that's something you can consider. And keeping the daily routine, those of you that are teachers, I'm sure you're familiar with this, keeping the daily routine intact and as normal as possible is really helpful. Keeping a kid out of school for a month after their mom died is not healthy and not helpful. They need stability, back to that first slide on children. And never force a child to publicly mourn. If they want to participate, they should be allowed to, but the opposite is true. If they really want nothing to do with it, that needs to be respected. And again, dishonest answers like grandpa's away on a trip, no. You need to be simple, kind, but honest. And never tell a child to stop crying, especially in a grief situation, or try to shield them from the loss. Because as we all know, I think, children pick up much more than we as adults often realize. And they need to be included in the grieving process for their own emotional and spiritual and mental health. And don't hide your own tears or grief from a child. Just like with other family members, they need to know it's okay to express their emotions. And finally, this is a real slippery slope. I've seen adults over the years, family members, who've turned a child into kind of their own confidant in their own grieving process. That's a bridge you don't want to cross. If you need a confidant to deal with your own grief, it should be another adult. Don't lay that on a kid of any age. So, moving forward, grief is not a mountain to be climbed with the strong reaching the summit before the peak, before the weak. It's not an athletic event. There's no stopwatches timing our progress. Grief is a journey through loss and pain. There's no competition and no trials. It's hard work. It's very hard work. And as I mentioned, it's not an illness or disease. It's a normal reaction to the loss of love. You grieve deeply because you love deeply. And you may ask, people ask all the time, right? Where is God? How could a loving God allow these bad things to happen? Well, Gregory Anderson, I think, said it well. If we can get our faith out in front of us, out in front of our anger. Every death is a door opening on the creative mystery. We fear death because we don't know it, we don't understand it. And fear, by definition, is the unknown. What we don't know or understand, we naturally fear, even if it's one of the great mysteries of God. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux said, "I believe, though I do not comprehend, and I hold by faith what I cannot grasp in the mind." Anybody see him yet? There he is. So, as the guy hiding behind the curtain said, I am the resurrection and the life. And whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who loves and believes in me will never die. And we have to ask ourselves, do we believe this? John also said, the truth will make you free. And I'll tell you as I close, when someone is dying, there's two things I've seen over the years that make all the difference in the world in how they grieve for themselves as they're dying. The first is, how did they live their life? Are they at peace? Were they at peace with all that they've done? Maybe not all, but in general, how they've lived their life. And the second thing is the strength of that person's faith. Life is changed, not ended. When life and death are brought together, it really can enhance life. Some of the most profound growing experiences come from times of death. It brings families together. It gives a stage for imparting wisdom from old to young. The experience and the drawing together and the love that comes out of these situations is immense. The amount of love that comes out of a family grieving is something to behold. You feel more deeply, you appreciate more sincerely, and you love more compassionately, which I would say makes us more fully alive. Entrust the past to God's mercy, the present to his love, and the future to his providence. That's the end of my bull. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to hang around and answer any questions. And let's see, have the references here. There's my email at the bottom if anyone would like a copy of the presentation.